Hi everyone. In today's video, we're gonna look at function calling, which is one of the feature of OpenAI GPT models, using which you can connect your large language model to external or let's say internal APIs or the tools, including your database or whatever the APIs we have. So we're gonna see some hands-on, some real practical example. So what I'm gonna do actually, so the first thing I'm gonna show you how the function calling is working with an existing, let's say, chat completions API. So we have this chat completions API. How does function calling currently working with this chat completion API? And then we're gonna eventually see how does the function calling is actually working with the assistant. So in the assistant, you can treat function calling as one of the tools for the assistant right here, and you can see. So we're gonna see both the examples, okay? And I'm gonna share the code also with you so that you can try, yourself. And if you're not familiar with assistant API, what we're gonna see today, you can go and check my earlier video where we have this beginner tutorial where we go through the assistant API, understand its a flow, and all the beginner level details you can go and check. So let's start with, so the first thing definitely we're gonna require the OpenAI library and the let's say we're gonna initiate the OpenAI client. Okay, and to make it real, what I did actually, so I have created one API which kind of simulate the order details things. So I have a database where I have a lot of orders, customers, and all of those details. So basically, I have a, let's say, function which is nothing but the get order details, which takes the order, calls our internal API, and simply returns the order information. So if I execute this function, you can see if I pass the order ID is equal to 1, that function returning some information about the delivery status, where it is currently that order, what is it expected delivery, and that kind of stuff. Data might be old because I just generated the data. So look at the concept rather than the actual, the factual correctness of the data. Similarly, if I pass some different order ID, I should get the order ID for details. So our job is to teach GPT to use this particular function whenever customer or user gonna ask something related to the order. If customer wants to know their order status, this is the function that they needs to call, right? And I just created one dictionary here which represents the mapping between the name of the function and the actual function, what we have, because we're gonna require this particular mapping later, right? Now, if you want, just I told you, right, we want to make sure GPT understand that we have a, such a function. So we need to create some specification here for each function. So currently, I have only one function. So here is only one object in this particular list, right? And this function, I'm telling about the name of my function, which is the get order details. Here is the description so that GPT understand when to call this particular function. So I put that, retrieve the details of a given order and some kind of detail. And then I talk about kind of parameters this particular function gonna take. I'm gonna say it is going to take order ID, which is going to be an integer. And, I can specify if I have multiple parameters, I can specify which parameter is required. So I don't need to, this is pretty easy. I don't remember this syntax. I simply take one of the example from the OpenAI documentation, and I use simply ChatGPT and ask it to generate that particular specification for me, right? But I understand what exactly that particular specification, right? Now let's see how we can pass these functions to our chat completions API. So here is a function, a typical chat completion API. We have seen in many tutorials, where we take our OpenAI client and we call the chat completion API, specifying the model that we want to call, the message array that we want to pass. The here is the new thing is the functions. So we can pass actually the list of functions here, and then the function call is equal to auto means the GPT will decide if there are multiple functions which one to call or something like that. Okay, so this is simple utility function that we have seen it at many places, right? Then I have one more utility function, and we will see how we're going to use them actually, which something nothing but simply execute the function. So here I'm going to pass, hey, here is my function name called get order details, here is the order ID. It is going to simply call our function. It's going to take the arguments and simply unpack those and call. We're going to see where we're going to use it. So this function job is to just execute the function that we're going to give. Now let's test our this chart completions API and see whether it is able to identify the functions, right? Let's do these things. So first I'm going to test for the query called tell me a joke. So let's say I'm going to ask ChatGPT completion API, tell me a joke, right? And here is the messages array that I'm creating. I'm putting role as a user, and the query is what I'm just going to ask, right? And we know that we created one utility function which will take our message array. So at the moment, message array has only this one object, which is like whatever something the user is asking. Now let's say what response we get from the chat completion API. Okay, the functions is not defined. Maybe we didn't run that particular cell. Okay, so let's run that cell and come back here again, and let's execute the chat completions API. Okay, so we got something chat completion message, and which is we see the content, which is nothing but the actual GPT reply. It is saying that I'm glad you asked, how does the computer get drunk? Okay, some kind of a joke it has sent with the role of assistant, right? And you can see function call is equal to none. So based on all the details we provided, the GPT thinks that it doesn't need to call actually the function to reply for this kind of stuff, right? Now let's try to ask something else. So instead of this, we will ask maybe I want to know my order status. This is what we're going to ask, and let's see what we get. So we're going to focus on what we get at the content level and what we're going to get at the function call level. So let's run again our chat completions API, and let's see, we got the message, we still got the content message saying that sure, I can help you with that. Please provide me with the order ID to call this function. And there is still not any function calling, because GPT knows that before calling the function it needs to have all the required parameter which requires the order ID. That is the reason it is asking for order ID before it is actually making function call is equal to true. What will happen if I give all the information which GPT requires? Okay, now I'm saying like this. What is my order status of order ID is 4 or order ID, whatever, it will understand that I'm asking about this thing, and see what happens now. Now if you see, the content is equal to none. Now GPT haven't replied me anything like a text message. Rather it is telling me that I need to call a function call, because now I got all the information. And GPT is telling me you should call a function name called get order details. And here is the argument that you should pass to your function. That is the use of the specification what we have given to the GPT. This is what happens. So when you get response from the GPT, we can check whether we need to call a function or not, right? Let's say in our case, in this particular criteria, we know that we need to call the function. So how can we get that function details? So whenever we get the response message we just saw here, it has a property called function call, and that has two things, the name and the arguments. So let's retrieve that information. Here we could see the get order details is the name of the function, and this is the order details, right? Now as I told you, we need to get that information, right? So GPT has suggested us that hey, you should call your get order details, and here is the parameter. So let's execute the function. So this is where our utility function is getting used. We are passing the function name, which is the get order details, and the arguments, and this will call our API or whatever the function we have. And this is the response that we got from our utility function that we had earlier seen it here, get order details. Now since we got the reply from our own API, right? We need to give it back to GPT, because GPT has asked us to run that function. We need to give that information back to GPT so that it can generate response for the user, right? If you look at our current message array, what we have, it has only this thing, you know, first only one message, what is my order status of this order ID. So first thing we will do, we will append in that message array whatever the response we had got for the function call, because GPT should know that it was about the function call. So we will first insert that response related to the function call. Then what we will insert, then we will insert the response that we got from our own function. So now GPT knows that it has to be we had called, let's say, the function, and here is the response that we got from the function. So we appended two messages inside this message array, and it will look now something like this: original message, function call and the output of that particular function call. Now let's GPT generate the response for the user. And if I now send back, this is what GPT has generated, that this is what now user gonna see or the customer gonna see. The order ID with this particular flow, is actually shipped and it is in warehouse and all of this thing, right? You could write better prompt, system role to define what messages what we want to see here, but that's not the purpose here. The purpose here to show you this is how we're gonna give GPT or internal function detail so that the chat GPT can communicate with our internal APIs. So imagine if you're an e-commerce website and you have the chatbot, you can deploy this thing function there so that if user asks anything related to the order ID, GPT will decide which function to call. Then we're gonna call that function, and automatically the user is gonna get the response that what is the status of their order. So this is what with respect to our current chat completions API. Okay, I hope you understand. Now let's go back to the assistant API, which is the new API, and we know that it also supports the function calling as one of the tool, because assistant is capable of tools like taking a tools like the code interpreter where it can interpret, it can generate the code, knowledge retrieval where you can upload the files and then it can answer from that particular document. This is what actually tutorial what we saw last time. We actually upload the document of my website like HTML page, and then we ask assistant a questions based on that particular document. And the good thing is that we didn't need to worry about the vector database or nothing. We simply uploaded the file, and then assistant API took care of chunking that file, finding the semantic chunk and giving the answer and everything, right? That's the beauty of let's say the assistant API. But today we're going to explore the other tool, which is called the function calling, right? So let's look at how the assistant API is actually capable of calling the function. Just like we define the specification for the functions, assistant API is also we need to define something similar. It is the same thing, but it's like a list of tools kind of a thing we are passing. So here is the for assistant, we define that same function like this, that hey, I'm giving you the list of tools. Here is the one tool, its type is equal to function, and here is the same thing what we saw on the top, right? So let's declare these tools for the assistant. Now again, if you are not familiar, you haven't watched that video, let me quickly in 1 minute tell you what is the flow of creating the assistant API or how do we use it actually. So here is the the notebook that I had given with that particular tutorial. So basically, as I told you, we created that assistant which is capable of answering questions based on the uploaded document. So if I go here, you could see the first thing we did actually to upload the file. We uploaded file on the OpenAI platform. Then we created the assistant. So when you create the assistant, I'm not sure, maybe I zoom it a bit. Yeah. So when we create an assistant, we kind of give some name to the assistant. We can give some instruction. We can give the set of tools, which model we want to use, and if any file we want the assistant should have the access, right? So the first thing is the creating assistant. Then what we do, then we create the thread. Thread represent the conversation. Maybe every time you click on the new conversation here, new chat is actually new. When I click here, it's actually the new thread creation, and then you can exchange messages between them. So every time a user interact with the chatbot on your website, you're gonna create actually the new thread for each user or each session you can think of, right? And once you create the thread which represent the conversation session, then you can actually create messages inside that thread, like whatever the message that we're gonna put, and eventually you're gonna execute or run that particular assistant, right? And once you run the assistant, it will go to the different status, whether it is completed, whether it is pending, and when it is completed, you're gonna get the response from the assistant. So this is the typical flow. Okay, now let's come back to the tutorial what we had, and we're gonna perform the same thing again here. So first thing, let's create the assistant. Now here I'm telling the name of my assistant is going to be the e-commerce bot. Here is the instruction that you are an e-commerce bot, use the provided functions to answer questions, and maybe I just say that synthesize the answer based on the provided function output and pick anyway. there could be a spelling mistake because I didn't bother about all of this. GPT is enough smart to deal with all of those things, right? Now, since we got the assistant created, I created one more utility function because we know that whenever we want to get some output from the assistant, we had to actually create the message. So I just declare one utility function. Okay, here what it does actually, it takes our assistant, the user query, and then it checks do we have already a thread. If we don't have the thread, it creates a thread. Okay, and then finally it's going to create the message with whatever the query that user has sent, which is the creation of the that whatever the thread dot message dot create, and we're going to simply run that particular message, and we're going to get the run represent whenever we execute something actually. All right, and this is what this utility function, we will see in detail when we're going to actually run actually the assistant API, right? This is what this particular function does. And then we have one more utility function. What it actually does, we know that, right? We just saw here. So whenever GPT wants us to call a particular function, it has some way of indicating it. So in the chat completion thing, whenever the function call has some value, it means we need to call the function. And then this is the syntax we use actually to extract the name of the function and the arguments that we need to pass, which actually we got from the OpenAI, or let's say from the GPT itself, right? Similarly, for the assistant API, I actually also created one function because the thing is that every object is so much nested or hierarchical, to get something you need to actually access like 3 4 levels down, right? So I simply created one utility function which take the run that we got from here. When we're going to run the message, we're going to get that run, and that run, if it required an action just like a calling a function or something like that, this way I can access actually the name of the function. Okay, for now just don't bother about it. The moment we will print that object, then it will be much more clear. The only thing you can remember here, this is the utility that is giving me the name of the function and the argument that I need to call, right? That's the job of this particular function. Now, since we got, whenever we just saw in the chat completion, whenever we got response from the function that we call, we need to submit back that response to the chat GPT so that it will generate response from the user. For assistant API, it is the same thing. So I also created one utility function whose job is to actually take the function response that I got from our own API, which is the get order details API, and simply call the submit output endpoint, or that particular function of the OpenAI library, which will take the function ID because it could be the multiple function. So it takes the function ID that we actually called, and then the function response. Now this way GPT knows what response we got from our own API, right? This is how we submit the response. Okay, enough of this, all of those things. Now let's actually run these things. Here I did something better than what we just saw earlier. Here I try to simulate the chatbot kind of scenario so that we can ask some follow-up questions, and we don't need to tell everything in one particular thing. Now let's run the thing. So I'm going to run the query called I want to know my order status, right? And as I told you, we already created the utility function which will take our assistant and the query, and it will simply create message and run our query. Now let me print run also what we got. This is how a typical run looks like actually. Okay, so run is nothing but whenever you run something, some message on that assistant. Let's look at the status. You say the status is queued, means it is still in the in progress or kind of a status, right? And you can see all these function details which is a part of this particular run, I guess, right. And the thing is that we have also seen in the previous tutorial that since assistant goes through the different status, we need to keep track of does the status completed. So we have to use some kind of a while loop and keep retrieving the our run information to see whether it got completed or not. For that purpose, we actually have this while loop. What this while loop does, it simply retrieve that, it takes our run ID and the thread ID that we just had on the top, and it will retrieve that run. It will print that status of that particular run, and now we are checking through status. If we see that the run status is completed, means GPT directly has some output that we can directly show to the user. Okay, then if it is completed, this is the way we can access. So threads has the message list, because since we are putting messages inside the thread, OpenAI assistant also puts the response inside the same thread. So using this list, we can get all those messages, and the first message is actually the latest message, and we simply print that message. Okay, here let me run this thing. So when I run this thing, if you see, the run status was completed, means GPT had something for a user. What GPT says, to help you with your order status, I will need the order ID, because it knows that we have given the tool specification that, hey, you're gonna require the order ID to do something. Now let's see what happens. Let me submit saying that, order ID is 1. Now it again go to the while loop and it see what happened. It again went to the run status queued. Okay, it's in the while loop, right? Then see what happens. Then it went to the status called the require action. Now require action is where we have to call our function. So instead of completed, GPT went, the assistant went into the require action. And what action we need to require? Let's see what's happening inside the code. So whenever it went to inside this require action, this is where we want to know our function name. So we are using that utility function called get function details, which will take the run, which is in the required action stage, and gonna return the function name, arguments, and the function. So if you look at our utility function, which actually get function details, we have printed the run dot required action object. So let's look at what that object has. So this is how that required action object looks like. This is like this big, and you could see it will have the details of all these things. So it has a tools calls. This is the ID. This is the call that we want to make. This is the ID of the function. Here is the function details, and you can see this argument we need to pass the function, and this is the name of the function. So the required action has all the details that is needed to call the function. Now next, what happened? When we got these details from our utility function, we use our execute function, which is nothing but executing our that particular function. We got the response, and as I told you, once we got the response, we need to submit that response back inside the thread or for the assistant, right? And that's what here happens. So we submitted and we again continued our conversation. So let's go back to again that submit tool. What happened? Nothing but it is submitting the response. What response exactly we are submitting? So if you look at what response we got, so okay, I haven't printed here response, I guess, but whatever the response we got here, we actually pass it to that submit tool function. So this is nothing but it again called our thread run submit tool, and now here we are passing the function ID that we just called and the response that we got. Now GPT knows actually what, and once it knows, then the loop again continued, right? And then it went into the, let's see where it went. Once we submit the action, the function detail, it again went to the queued state, it went to the in progress, and then it completed. Then it came here because now it got the response because we have submitted the detail. Now what this is what it displayed for the user. It is saying that the delivery status is shipped, it is in the warehouse, and all of this thing, right? The order consists of the laptop, and all of this detail it has given for the user. Then I might still ask you, okay, when can I expect the delivery? And see what happened. When I asked when can I expect the delivery, it first went into the queued status, then it again went to the progress, and finally completed because it has all the information, and it is saying that I can expect by January. I know the dates are old, the data is old, but you can see this is what the correct thing what the site. So we are able to ask the follow-up question because it knows. Okay, so I can understand, since this is not a proper chatbot UI, but still I try to explain, we try to simulate that thing here in the while loop. And you don't need to worry about that, you don't remember how can I get the function name and argument. Even I don't remember, I don't know this shit. You just need to take this code, or if you have any doubt, you can go to the the API reference, and there you can simply see the hierarchy. Here is the required action, and then actually you're gonna get the list of tool calls. If you have multiple function, you can get this multiple function call. You will get the name of the function, you will get the argument. So we don't need to remember anything, right? And this is the what I'm gonna share the code with you. And I made one condition that if the user input is a stop, I need to exit this for loop. So I'm just gonna do the stop, and I'm gonna exit this while loop. Okay, this is the finish. So I hope you found this video useful. You got both the code for the chat completion API and also for the assistant API. Try this thing, and if you face any issue, let me know inside the comment, and I should be able to respond you. Thank you very much.